Hello, 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 everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to another, I don't know what to call these. When I do my podcast, I call it an edition. Um, Session, moment, edition. I don't know. You'll tell me. You'll tell me in the comments what you think is the right word. But welcome to another call of plant consciousness commentary. Um, I am. It's last week was God, I am speaking badly today. Okay, let me just take a breather. Hold on a second. I was running to get here on time. So let me just take a breather. I'm going to take a nice deep breath in. Okay. I feel better. I feel better. I feel nice. I feel centered. I have my tea. My tea is still a little too hot. I am not one for super, super hot tea. Nope, still too hot. But I'm happy to have it. And I'm happy to be home. Last week I was traveling. For those that are new around here, hello. I am Tigrida Gardenia, nature inspired mentor and leadership. I'm not a leadership coach. Well, I am a leadership coach actually, but I used to use that as my title. Now I use certified life coach. But I'm also a world ambassador for plant intelligence. And that's really what we're going to be doing here. Today, here we're going to be talking specifically around plenty things, hence our plant consciousness commentary. And this is actually the continuation of last week. So last week, I thought I was going to do both the topics. I was going to do an article that was talking about the mysteries of plant intelligence that really went into all of the different controversy and debate and conversation around plant intelligence. Just the latest of many articles around this topic. There are so many articles. We've gone through so many papers and articles in this stream every week. And this one was one of the newest ones because it came on the heels of a new book by this author. And so you can just go back and look at last week's stream. It's called The Mysteries of Plant Intelligence. And my idea originally was to do both of these where I would talk about this article, and then go into the paper that we're going to go to today. But I was traveling and the lighting was really bad. And, just life took over. But I'm here now. I'm comfortable. I have tea. It's beautiful weather outside, a little chilly for my taste. I'm more of a summer girl and we're heading into fall, but I'm okay with it. It's happening and I just have to deal with it. And so, we're just going to have to deal with it. And so we're going to go into I'm excited. I'm really, 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 really excited. I'm very rarely really excited about a paper because I'm kind of almost always a little bit afraid of a paper. But this paper it's a paper from 2021. As you know, we're going through kind of almost chronologically, although we're getting to the place where the chronology doesn't really matter and where I'm skipping around a little bit because I want to get more the argument, the discussion in one story. So this is an exciting paper because it is about changing the paradigm. So the other day I was listening to a really beautiful podcast. I think I was listening to Emergence Magazine, and it was a gorgeous podcast about it was about racial divide and rights and things of this nature. And what I liked about it was that there was two scientists that were talking on this podcast, and where they had both been very staunch advocates of civil rights for so long, but they were taking kind of slightly different approaches. And as they were both professors in universities, and they were having this really interesting conversation, and one of them finally just turned to the other and was like, I'm starting to understand what you're saying, which is that if we keep focusing on, we obviously have to keep awareness on the fact that there is a problem. There is still a problem relating to these types of conversations. But if we keep only focusing on the problem, we never end up with a new paradigm. And this is something that I've been talking about for a while. I remember when I came back after a hiatus for my podcast, Reconnect with Plant Wisdom, I had this moment of epiphany, and I had this conversation on one of the episodes around the fact that we need to start thinking in new paradigms. We need to stop thinking about incremental change. I'm actually excited about the next podcast episode, which really talks about this in a different way, about disruptive sort of change from a plant animal conversation. And I'm really excited about this next episode. And this conversation around the paradigm shift is changing, is really becoming something that I am focusing a lot of attention on right now personally. I'm looking at many of my fields of study and of knowledge and of my clients that I work with, and I'm realizing that incremental change is just not going to cut it anymore. So given that, I was excited to find this paper because we don't see this type of conversation happening very often. So let me at least prep stuff. Hold on. Let me share. That's not what I wanted. I wanted this one right now. Okay. So this is the paper that we're going to get into today. We are, hold on. I'm trying to, full screen mode. Is that the one? No. There's two modes, and I almost always get the wrong mode when I try to set it up. I haven't figured out why. I think it's this mode. Okay. So this is a paper that came out actually in Plant Signaling and Behavior. Now, plant signaling behavior is interesting because plant signaling behavior as a journal was originally the Journal for Plant Neurobiology, but part of the group of scientists that started the entire movement of plant neurobiology in the field of plant neurobiology struggled with the backlash of the term neurobiology and ended up changing to plant signaling and behavior. And so the journal was also changed into plant signaling behavior. So even though we see the words plant signaling behavior and technically they mean the same thing, this is all about plant neurobiology. That's really the focus that they're in. So this paper is about broadening the actual definition of a nervous system because, and I've used this kind of conversation piece before, I've talked about the fact that oftentimes we get caught up in the way that certain things are named in their wording and in the titles given, and those titles then make it impossible for us to break out of the paradigm or break out of the model that those terminologies were created in. So this is a different approach rather than fighting the whole conversation of he said, she said around the nervous system, and plants have a pseudo nervous system, but that's not a real nervous system. And why are we calling it a pseudo nervous system? Why aren't we calling it something different? But if we don't call it a pseudo nervous system, then we don't recognize the similarities in behavior from, the plants have, and it just goes on and on and on. So what Sergio Miguel-Tomé and Rodolfo Llinás got together and started to look at the idea of let's broaden the entire definition of a nervous system, because that's the only way we're going to better understand the evolution of plants and actually animals, because there are a whole number of animals that, again, do not have nervous systems the same way as we human mammals have nervous systems. So I think this is a brilliant approach. I have not read, as always, this paper, so I am not sure exactly the direction they're going to take it. I don't even know if it's going to be above our heads. You know how it is. Some of these might be super, super technical. Either way, the fact that somebody in 2021 is finally, after all these years of the plant and human neurobiology debate or argument or almost food fight, seriously, sometimes it feels like a food fight. And I'm actually going to a conference next week, so I'm really excited. And I'll tell you all about it when we meet next Friday. But I'm going to a conference with some of the big names like, Cahill and Elizabeth Van Volken. I'm just really excited to be going to a conference where I get to sit with these folks and have these conversations. So this paper kind of says, screw this conversation and this argument. I'm going to take it and I'm going to go into it in a different way where I'm going to reset the paradigm, or at least that's what I'm hoping he's going to do. So this is where we are going to go. Remember that if you have not seen any of our previous commentary, if you are new to all of this, I have probably reviewed like 70 papers, if not 80 papers at this point. We're kind of getting close to the hundreds, folks. We're getting close. And so You can go to my website, tigriagardenia.com/commentary, and there you will find papers galore. I've literally published all the old ones so that you can go back and go through them, and you can see many of them are inside of the Naturally Conscious community. And so you can join the Naturally Conscious community to see some of the really older ones. Many of them are also on YouTube now and on my website. So this is the place for you to go to get the history, because we're just going to dive in as we always do. So I'm going to put this in the show notes always so that you can find it when I'm done. It's going to be in the description. But yeah, commentary is the place for you to go. Okay. And then the Naturally Conscious community is the place to continue these conversations. You know that this is your premier ecosystem for all of these human plant relations. Okay. That being said, let's dive into it. I'm excited. Let me put it into make it bigger, big, 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 big. And then I can't make it too big, because then if I try to go one above to make it bigger, it becomes too big. Oh no, I do have this here. Hold on. Ooh. Not 200, a little bit less. Can we go? Okay. All right. I tried to make it a bigger and I ended up kind of screwing up. 150 is what it is. All right. This is where we are. This is where we're at. This is, like I said, a plant signaling and behavior publication, broadening the definition of a nervous system to better understand the evolution of plants and animals. I like descriptions and titles that are clear, super clear. Sergio Miguel-Tomé and Rodolfo R. Llinás. And they are, I don't know where they are yet. We'll find out, hopefully. I like knowing where my, there we go. From el Grupo de Investigación en Minería de Datos, Universidad de Salamanca, in Salamanca, Spain. So this is the Department of Neuroscience and Physiology, and also New York University Medicine. Nice. Okay, so let's get into it. I'm very, very, very excited. The abstract. Most textbook definitions recognize only animals as having nervous systems. However, for the past couple of decades, botanists have been meticulously studying long-distance signaling systems in plants. And some researchers have stated that plants have a simple nervous system. Can we not just we don't have to use the diminutive. We can just say a nervous system. Why is it simple? Maybe it's extremely complex in that it does a lot with a little. We don't know. Our wording already tends to try to create divides. Let's change the paradigm, folks. If you're changing the paradigm, take out the word simple. That's what I'm saying. Thus, an academic conflict has emerged. You think? That's a very mild and super diplomatic way of calling this situation between those who defend and those who deny the existence of a nervous system in plants. This article analyzes that debate, another one, and we propose an alternative to answering yes or no, broadening the definition of a nervous system to include plants. We claim that a definition broader than the current one, which is based only on phylogenetic viewpoint, would be helpful in obtaining a deeper understanding of how evolution has driven the features of signal generation, transmission, and processing in multicellular beings. Also, we propose two possible definitions and exemplify how broader a definition allows for new viewpoints on the evolution of plants, animals, and the nervous system. Now, this is actually way more important than you might think, because not only does doing something like this change the concept for plants, but in reality, it opens us to an understanding that we can change our entire way of looking at something and evolve to a more expansive model. In other words, if we look at this is the same conversation we're having under consciousness. It's the same conversation we're having under intelligence. We had the same conversation around memory, for example. Memory is a big one because memory has structures in the human brain that we understand today to think of as like most memory works in this way, but in plants, we don't yet understand. So again, some scientists struggle with being able to accept that plants have memory. So they try to then use other types of words. If instead we separated, and this is separated out, concept from mechanism, we would have so much more possibility of evolution because, as I said in one of my episodes of the podcast, we're stunting our own evolution by putting all these rigid definitions in place. So any rigid definition does not allow space for change and growth, and therefore for evolution. If instead we give lots of broad space, we have more ample room for what could be new developments. Not only that, we start to train, from our human perspective, our own way of thinking to the possibility that there could be other things. And therefore, we expand our own perceptions. So in some ways, we expand our own consciousness and our own awareness when we separate out conceptualizations of what something can be from how that thing works. And this happens all over the place. You know that I'm very big on the fact that what I show you here, what we talk about here, is very technical sometimes relating to the papers, but the application of it is about extrapolating and understanding how these models affect all of us, how it is that we ourselves can expand and grow and really step deeper into our plantness, which is an expansion of our humanness, because it's our humanness that right now is very limited. Our humanness is the one that has all these rigid boundaries and controls that we keep putting into place. When we step deeper into that presence of our plantness, we have the possibility of truly expanding out to an entire new level of being. And this is something that just is missing right now. We really need to do this as a society, as human beings. And so understanding that these types of broadenings in the scientific understanding of these materials, consciousness and nervous system and such, allows us greater flexibility and access to our own mechanisms and allows us to find more solutions to the situations and the problems and the difficulties that we are experiencing as human beings right now. So that's why this is so important. We cannot fully understand ourselves as human beings unless we allow for the possibility that other beings affect us in great ways. And this is one of those ways. My little rant right there, because you know how much this means to me. Okay, so let's get into the introduction. Under the entry for nervous system, Encyclopedia Britannica states that in animals, in addition to chemical regulation via the endocrine system, which plants have, I don't know if that which plants have is part of it. Maybe it does. There is another integrative system called the nervous system. Most dictionaries and textbooks maintain that only animals have nervous systems. Although plants do not have nervous system according to the phylogenetic definition, a growing body of botany research from the past 25 years shows that many plants transmit electrical signals to and from different parts of their bodies to respond to environmental stimuli. Several scientists from different fields have spoken about plant neurobiology and the nervous system of plants. We've reviewed many of those papers. We've talked about many of those researchers. Go through, remember, tigriagardenia.com/commentary. You'll find it. It's there. Okay. But this new viewpoint is not free of controversy and has been criticized by others, many others. I'm not even going to read the footnotes because it's that many. One could consider this controversy to be an ontological debate. I need to create a bingo card that we use for I want to create some bingo cards. I think I should send you all bingo cards. And therefore we have a whole series of words that show up in the bingo cards. And then we can see, like per people, for example, when does Michael Martyr show up? When does Michael Hall show up? which is funny because I would have expected a lot more Mancuso and Balushka, but instead, no, these are the ones. When does Paco Calvo show up? And then also, I would love to see, ontological, plant neurobiology. We have a whole series of terms that I think could be quite fun and interesting. Okay, let's get into it. One could consider this controversy to be an ontological debate about whether some entities belong to one category or another, not affecting physiological plant and animal research. But this debate is not harmless to scientific knowledge. No. It is significant in evolutionary biology because a phylogenetic definition does not allow for considering process of convergence evolution, which is necessary when discussing the evolution of living beings. In this article, after reviewing the scientific literature on electrical signaling in plants and discussing the criticisms of plant neurobiology from an evolutionary point of view, we propose that broadening the definition of a nervous system will provide a greater understanding of the evolution of how plants and animals generate, transmit, and process signals. To highlight the advantages of a broader definition, we use a definition that allows us to discuss the evolutionary directions of different nervous system features in plants and animals. In this paper, we do not address the existence of consciousness in plants nor take sides on the issue. Well, this is equivalent of saying they don't address the existence of consciousness in animals either. It's just they don't take an issue. We separate the issues of consciousness and the nervous system, which I think is fair. Although we conceive of consciousness as a functional state that exists in at least some nervous systems, consciousness continues to be one of the most unknown phenomena in nature, despite research progress in the area. Thus, our approach to the debate about nervous system in plants is only from a physiological perspective. This is a cover yourself because don't bite off more than you can chew. I'm okay with that. I mean, they are still trying to change a paradigm, so I'm okay with the fact that they're going piece by piece, by which we take into account only the generation, transmission, and processing of signals. We are aware that formulating a definition for the term nervous system is challenging because it needs to be general enough to allow discussing convergent and divergent evolutionary processes, but not so general that it becomes meaningless by including any systems of signals. Proof of the difficulty of this challenge is the fact that Elsevier's Encyclopedia of Neuroscience does not have an entry for the term nervous system. While this task is likely to fail because of this difficulty, we think that the possibility of gaining a better understanding of nature makes the attempt to formulate a definition worthwhile. I love that they added this because one of the kind of problem spaces that we have in the scientific world right now, especially, is the idea that the field. Sorry, I got distracted by something because I just saw Janaya's comments. Thank you so much, Janaya, so much for being here and for coming and joining us. Sorry, I get excited and sometimes I get distracted. That's just what it is. Anyways, so while this task is likely to fail, I like the fact that they included this because it is a difficult task. And I think that there are going to be multiple failed attempts, or at least attempts that are not going to be recognized as successes, which is not exactly the same thing, but they are important. So I think that it is a very beautiful thing that they put it in here directly, like saying, hey, we need more research and we're going to fail multiple times because it's going to take a while for us to massage this definition in a way that feels good to everybody. But that's okay. So that's okay for us to do. This paper is structured as follows. Section 2 reviews the most important literature about electrical signal generation, transmission, and processing in plants. Section 3 reviews textbook definitions of nervous systems and the differences between physiological and anatomical definitions of biological systems. We also discuss criticisms of plant neurobiology from an evolutionary viewpoint. Section 4 presents two options to redefine the concept of what a nervous system is. Section 5 shows how broadening the definition of nervous system allows for discussing the evolutionary directions of signaling features of plants and animals. Section 6 presents a summary of the conclusions and the importance of broadening the definition of of evolutionary biology. All right, we're going to get into this now. Section 2, plant behaviors and the mechanisms of electrical signals. Now that we know where we're going, let's go in there. Throughout history, people generally thought of plants as passive organisms, disconnected from information in their environment and performing mechanical functioning without communicating between their organs and structured parts. How? How? Explain to me how. How does anybody believe that any organism, especially one that does as many things as a plant, but any organism really, would grow and exist without being able to even communicate among itself, key self? Why? How? How does that happen? Why would that even happen? I just don't get it. I don't get it. This view, however, began to be questioned during Darwin's time. I don't know. I think many fairy tales questioned this way before that, but that's okay. After research on electrical signals in plants was published, motivated by conversations with Darwin about the Venus flytrap, John Burden Sanderson conducted the first experiment that registered an action potential in a plant. An action potential is an electrical response. It's specifically there's several types, but action potentials are the electrical responses, that the firing of electrical responses in plants. Later, Jagadish Chandra Bose, everybody loves Bose. Bose is great. Go read Bose stuff. Bose good. Not the speaker company. This Bose performed experiments that demonstrated the electrical nature of signals generated in different plants by different stimuli, e.g., for example, non-destructive electrical shocks, wounds, chemical agents. Poor babies. In the name of science. We experiment in the name of science. His findings were astonishing because at the time, it was thought that plants use hydromechanical mechanisms to transmit signals, unlike animals which use electrical impulses. They were wrong in their thought process. His studies also showed that electrical signals exist in both sensitive and non-sensitive plants. Despite the topicality of the debate we address in this paper, the idea that plants have a nervous system goes back to Bose. I need to go look at the date for Bose, because I found a paper that talked about looking into plants in this particular way in the 1700s. And I don't remember if I think Bose was later than that, but I need to go look and see all the timings. He wrote, "The results of the investigation, which I have carried out for the last quarter of a century, established the generalization that the physiological mechanism of the plant is identical with that of the animal." And yet we're still arguing this. Since then, many more studies have confirmed that plants respond quickly by generating, transmitting, and processing electrical signals. In the following text, we briefly review some of the most important research and discoveries about plant behavior and signaling that have been reversing our initial view of plants. I like how they say reversing rather than correcting. Correcting. That would be a better word, correcting. And we should say, I'm sorry. Sorry to all of you. Within the plant kingdom, some sensitive vascular plants, such as the Venus flytrap, Dionea muscipula. I have to figure out if it's like more of Italians. Anyway, sorry, I get distracted. Have been studied in depth. The Venus flytrap uses leaves to capture insects, and it has to make 2 predictions to be successful. This is important for those of you that don't know how this works. It's really, really interesting. The Venus flytrap really can count, because the Venus flytrap has to be touched 2 times in order to close the trap. So most people think it's kind of like this automatic mechanism, kind of like a simple trap. I hate using that. I just use simple when I insulted simple at the beginning. Anyways, when you use a trap where you pull the leg out and so the trap falls, that's not how the Venus flytrap. The Venus flytrap has to be hit 2 times for different reasons, and they're going to go into it now. First, it must decide whether what is on the leaf is foodstuff to prevent it from closing on sand and other useless materials, because that would be a waste of energy. The Venus flytrap distinguishes inanimate objects from prey by registering 2 mechanical stimuli within 20 to 30 seconds. See, plants can count. When this occurs, the leaves jump to a semi-closed state. Second, the plant must decide whether the prey is worth closing for, because again, energy. If the insect is too small and escapes through the gaps, the plant will not register additional signals. If the insect is appropriate size, it will evoke further mechanical stimuli and the trap will fully close. Additionally, the Venus flytrap can jump from an open state to a semi-closed state in 0.03 seconds, and from a semi-closed state to a fully closed state in 0.03 seconds. Electrical signals play an important role in these high velocity reactions and leaf movements by propagating waves of action potentials. The Venus flytrap uses the distinct electrical states of its cells to process information, and this mechanism could allow for reacting to a wide range of prey movements. Also, it has been observed that the Venus flytrap has several interconnected electrical circuits. Despite these interesting features, this plant is not an oddity. Aldrovanda and Utricularia are other carnivorous plants that use action potentials to generate predatory behaviors. Mimosa pertica is another widely studied plant with striking behavior. We all know the sensitive plant, the one that closes the leaves in order to kind of protect. And who knows what else, because we haven't been able to get into that mind to understand why. Mimosa pertica and Venus flytrap show how different evolutionary pressures have caused these plants to possess mechanisms that employ electrical signals. Whereas the Venus flytrap carries out predatory behavior, the Mimosa pertica employs electrical signaling to carry out anti-predator behavior. Key folds Key's leaves inward when stimulated, reducing the surface area exposed to potential predators. If Key continues to receive stimulation, the petiole drops and causes the potential predator to fall from the leaves. A remarkable fact discovered about the Mimosa pertica is that its anti-predatory behavior is condition dependent, like in animals. This comes to the study of Monica Galliano that discovered that the Mimosa pertica doesn't just drop for anybody, doesn't just close those leaves for any fear. Does for if it's an unknown thing, if it's something that I don't know what's happening. But once the mimosa understands that the threat is not a threat, then the mimosa stops closing the leaves. Although sensitive plants can generate high velocity action potentials, the lead predatory and anti-predator movements, these electrical signals are also used to send alerts about wounds and communicate between different tissues and organs. Electrical signals also elicit changes in physiological processes in ordinary plants. Also, it has been observed that circadian rhythms in plants have electrical components, and a new line of research involves electrical communication between plants. For example, researchers found electrical signal conduction between aloe vera and tomato plants. Plants can generate electrical signals for both short and long distances, and the propagation of electrical signals can be active or passive as they are in animals. These three types of long-distance electrical signals are the action potentials, variation potentials, which is slow wave potentials, and system potential. Action potentials in plants are important for transmitting information. Sorry, I'm stopping because Gary the silver fir is doing a little dance. Like there's wind, a little bit of wind out, which we don't normally have. So there's some movement that Gary is doing that's wind-based, but there's like this movement that's happening on the inner leaf, Gary's a fir. So it's, all these like, I can't describe it. I wish I had a second camera because I would turn it around right now so you could see what Gary the silver fir is doing, because it's like, now I started talking and Gary stopped. I'm not kidding you. Stopped moving. Stop it. Stop it. Stopped moving. Anyway, I'm going to keep going with the paper because I think that's better. So we're talking about signaling right now. We're going back to the signaling. We're talking about the different types of electrical signaling that plants possess. So, sorry. I keep looking up. This is the fault of Gary the silver fir that has distracted me. So we're talking about three types of long-distance electrical signals, which are action potential, variation potential, and system potential. 3 different types. Action potentials in plants are important for transmitting information, and their electrical activity contains information about environmental stimuli. The details of the ionic currents of action potentials in they're going to try and challenge me with all these plant names. I love it. Viridiplantae began to be uncovered in the early 1960s. But in contrast with our deep knowledge of the animal nervous system at the molecular level, what we know about channels involved in depolarization, and repolarization in higher plants remain mostly conjecture. I'm surprised that there are not more people that come to this stream just to see me fumble words. It took a long time to be okay with fumbling words. So obvious and so publicly, but whatever. That's how we learn. Despite this problem, research has shown that plants' action potentials are associated with an increase of sodium. Hold on. Me and my, sodium. Sorry. Sorry. I'm getting distracted again. And it's not, yeah. Okay. Sorry. I'm getting totally distracted today. Stop it. I'm yelling at Gary the Silverfur. Okay. Sorry. Despite this problem, research has shown that plants' action potentials are associated with an increase in calcium, in calcium and hydrogen concentrations, and a decrease of what is Cl? What is Cl, folks? What is Cl? Some people can't do math. I can't do these things. Chlorine. There you go. Chlorine and potassium. K is potassium. Got it. Right? K is potassium. I might insult myself, but I believe that K is potassium. See, I got it right. Okay. Concentrations and a decrease of chlorine and potassium in the cytoplasm. And the same concentrations change conversely in the apoplast. However, although voltage-sensitive calcium channels and voltage-sensitive chlorine channels have been identified for most of the proposed molecular mechanisms, there is no experimental proof that they are involved in action potentials. Studies have only recently confirmed that voltage-gated potassium channels responsible for repolarization exist, and that the proton pump, AHA1, is implicated in variation potential generation by controlling the membrane potential. Look, all of this sums up to say we're comparing this to what animals and specifically humans do. That's really what all these words say. All of these words that I'm reading out to you right now, which are important, and they're good to know, but that's really what they're saying. What this is saying, let me translate it, is, wow, we discovered that plants do many of the same things that actually the human nervous system does, or that, our signaling mechanisms do. That's really what's happening right now. Regarding long-distance signal transmission, plants use phloem and xylem to form the network to transmit electrical signals long distance within the plant, up and down between the phloem and the xylem. In maize plants, experiments have shown that different electrical signals existed in a sieve element of their phloem in response to different kinds of leaf tip stimulation. The recordings showed the action potentials were released when the stimulation involved chilling the plants, yet variation potentials occurred when the stimulation involved wounding the plants by cutting. In the name of science, we kill so many beings every day. Oh my goodness. The molecular mechanism of spreading action potentials is debated. So far, it has not been found that plants have chemical synapses to carry out cell-to-cell communication. Is this true? This is 2021. I'm trying to think. Or is it synapse-like? See, this is why I hate the words. Is it synapse or is it synapse-like? I'm not sure yet. I know that there are synapse-like send cell-to-cell communication, but I don't know if it's chemical synapse like what they're thinking of. One hypothesis was that the electrical field strength might be the element in the jumping transmissions, but the results of a subsequent research denied that hypothesis. Another hypothesis about the spreading is that the plasmodesmata membrane line channel. We did a whole paper on the plasmodesmata, so you can go back through and check those out. Play the same role in plants that gap junctions play in the animal nervous system and allow for electrical connection and action potential propagation. Xylem plays an important role in the propagation of variation potentials. A recent study using mutant plants. I'm sorry, you said mutant plants, and now you just put X-Men in my mind. I'm trying to figure out what mutant plants look like, or what are they? And I'm afraid. I'm afraid for the plants. What? While I'm thinking about that, and while I have ideas of different mutants running through my head, Michelle was explaining to us that we use potassium chloride as an electrolyte. Plants must use it similarly. Probably. Most likely. It's one of those things. So I wish, well, that's not true. What I'm trying to do is create the kind of Cliff Notes version of these papers. And yeah, that's not always so easy to do because you got to break down a lot of stuff. Xylem plays an important, where am I? Sorry. Xylem plays an important role in the propagation of variation potentials. A recent study using mutant plants found that the xylem is related to the velocity and kinetics of variation potential transmission in Arabidopsis. In regards to which type of cells and channels are involved in variation potentials, research has revealed important details in Arabidopsis thaliana, because everybody does experiments on poor little Arabidopsis. Using a genetic approach, the researchers found that this plant contains two distinct populations of cells necessary for transmitting electrical signals, and that these cells do not contact each other directly. They also found that phloem sieve tubes and xylem's contact cells function together in variation potential. The research also showed that insects feeding on genetically modified plants, those unable to send electrical signals, these mutant plants, poor little ones, gained weight more rapidly than those feeding on wild-type plants, indicating that insects found it more difficult to predate plants with systems for sending electrical systems, which makes sense because you just cut off their defense mechanisms. I don't know. That just seems obvious to me. Is it just because I'm too deep in it? I'm too deep in it, and so I think these things are obvious? I don't know. If signals exist, mechanisms to generate and interpret signals must exist. Yes, true. The generation of signals by mechanoreceptors has been an important research topic. In the case of the Venus flytrap, the electrical signals that generate the mechanoreceptor have been studied in depth, along with its molecular mechanism. The Mimosa perdica's mechanoreceptor and mechanisms of its electrical signal are not yet known. Excuse me. I keep getting this tickle in my throat. In the Arabidopsis, several key discoveries have been made in the last several years about the calcium channels involved in recognizing herbivory and the pathogens that activate defense signal mechanism. Despite these discoveries, the mechanisms responsible for transforming a long-distance electrical signal into the cellular response remains an underexplored issue. Of course it is. Even so, it is interesting that a recent study has provided. I also want to just state, I know I always cut off mid-sentence. I'll come back to the sentence, I promise. I also want to state that it sucks that we still have to, the only way we can accept certain things is not based on the behavior. So the plant cognition or plant psychology or really understanding plant behavior. It's always about the frickin' signaling. It's always about, let me dissect the plant. We don't do that as much with humans. We also recognize and have a rich field of study around behavior, But when it comes to plants and even many other animals, we don't. We go straight to the biology, straight to the how can I chop you up into tiny little pieces and then see what you're made of and then tell you you have no thoughts because I never learned how to read your behaviors. So therefore, you have no thoughts because I can't read you. So that means you don't have any. And therefore, I'm just going to go to the biology. But we have thoughts because we have all this behavior. But I took the time to read the behavior before I ever cut you up to figure out what was inside. It drives me nuts. Am I the only one? Am I the only one that feels like insulted by this? I just feel like it goes so far. Okay. Despite these discoveries, the mechanisms responsible for transforming long-distance electrical signals into a cellular response remains an underexplored issue. Even so, it's interesting that a recent study has provided important evidence of the mechanisms involved in decoding variation potentials into a specific respiratory response in pea seedlings. Regarding the mechanism that interprets signals, plant cells decipher information encoded in calcium oscillations that are induced in cytosolic free calcium. And several important discoveries about how the calcium signals are read or decoded have shown the interplay of the calcium channels. Transporters and sensors are involved in these processes. One important issue to consider is in the research of any natural phenomenon is the mathematical description. Really? That's the way you want to describe it? The mathematical description, that's from the natural phenomenon. That's the important area to research. I'm going to keep moving. Basic research on electrical signaling in plants has led to important developments in mathematically understanding electrical activity in plants. How about just getting to know the plant? When analyzing those mathematical models, an important issue emerges. Many of the elaborated mathematical models are modifications of the classical Hodgkin-Huxley model. The similarities do not stop there. So basically what we're trying to say is that many of the models that emerge when we start to analyze how the plants are doing things end up being the same as models we use for humans and animals. Again, I'm just decoding what we're reading. The similarities do not stop there. Some chemical messengers used by animal nervous systems have also been found in plants. Two important discoveries. This is an important discovery. It's something that was discovered a few years back, and it's become pretty widespread now and understood in the sense of like accepted. And that's really great, which is two important discoveries revealed that plants also use glutamate and gamma aminobutyric acid, or GABA, as signaling molecules, which is what we use as signaling molecules. Glutamate interacts with electrical signaling and with other signaling molecules. For example, glutamate plays a role in wound signaling when it is detected by glutamate receptor-like ion channels. They increase the intracellular calcium ion concentration, which creates a signal that propagates through the plant. Also, a recent study in Nitelopsis obtusa has given new evidence that NMDA is an active component in glutamatergic signaling in at least some plants. Regarding GABA, there are still open issues about its role in signaling within plants, but we know that it appears in plants for defense against herbivores and in response to extreme temperatures, dehydration, salinity, oxygen stress, mechanical damage, acidosis, and viral infection. All stuff that we struggle with too. We also know that GABA inhibits anion passage through the aluminum activated malate transporter. The similarities between the signaling mechanisms of plants and animals raise the question of whether animal aesthetics affect plants in a manner similar to animals. And anesthetics, I read that word. Anesthetics affect plants. But we already know this. We already did the entire paper around anesthetics. A recent study even found that animal anesthetics abolish movements in several sensitive plants and action potentials in Venus flytraps. We've already studied this paper. This is a paper that came out. It was also, and we've gone through it. It was also referenced in Paco Calvo's book, Planta Sapiens. So that's which we read, and the Plant Wisdom Book Club. So that's another place where you can go and check out and find out more information about how anesthetics works. I think actually we've read two papers. I think we read a Belushka paper and with Mancuso, and I think another paper that also references. So it's a very interesting study from the perspective of, again, this does give us a little bit of an external viewpoint, which is I apply an anesthetic to a plant and I get similar behavior of unconsciousness, which then, of course, the human consciousness folks went ballistic over, because they were like, that doesn't show consciousness. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. You just keep telling that, but you keep telling yourself that. But the similarities between plants and animals go beyond the mathematical description of their electrical signals and the molecular mechanisms that generate them. Similarities have been found between electrical signal systems of different plants. For example, the response in the touch perception process of chara, freshwater environments, and the turgor regulating response of the osmotic shock in Lamprothamnium, salt-tolerant types, are both generated by the same three stages. In Arabidopsis, petiole distortion from insects resembles certain aspects of the distal leaf collapse phase that has been seen in damaged Mimosa pertica. These discoveries indicate that these signal systems have an evolutionary history. Basically, all this is to say is that by recognizing that this isn't just something that is relegated to only certain plants, but now they're finding it in more plants, means that this is probably something that was an evolutionary trait. Now, but I know you know this, but I'm just going to reiterate it, that there are many things in evolutionary history that have appeared multiple times, but have evolved from completely different chains. So flight, for example, evolved very differently in birds as well as in bats. Flight is in insects, right? All of it is flight. All of it is wing-based of some sort, but each one of those wings has their own ways of being, and many of them follow completely different evolutionary tracks. Not only evolutionarily speaking, certain animals in particular, I'm sure this is for sure this has happened with plants, but I can think of in my mind one example of an animal description around this, where an animal that has gone extinct has reappeared in a completely different part of the world, which scientists say is not this thing went extinct over here, and somehow some gene, something showed up over there, but more of the world re-evolved that animal. There was a story of I think a kind of, it wasn't a bird exactly, but like a land bird that went extinct in an island and then showed up in another island many years later, but as a re-evolution of the exact same species. So we know that the planet has many different combinations of genes and of bacterias and of protists, all kinds of different things that create these beautiful soups that become us and all of the beings around you, and therefore can shuffle those in many different ways. And even sometimes, you hit the jackpot more than once. So you can have evolution happen in multiple ways. I am definitely sure that this is also what happened with us human beings. We evolved slightly different and even sometimes mostly the same in multiple locations, hence why we were able to commingle and not necessarily only be the genetic relatives and interbred relatives of ourselves. And this happens a lot in plants too, where a plant will show up in one location and will show up in a completely different location, and it's two evolutionary tracks that are different. I say this because this is what they're talking about in relation to the fact that if this nervous system-like system, right, whatever they want to call it, has evolved multiple times across multiple places for the plants, but it's all still a nervous-like. It's more, if it has done that, then that gives you even more reason why you want to broaden the definition of the nervous system to not include very limited perspective of animal nervous system evolution. Although we've discussed many details about plant signaling mechanisms, there are still controversies surrounding this topic. One of these is the proposal that plant signaling system has properties in common with neuronal Synopsis. Some researchers claim that the root apex cells secrete vesicles enriched with auxin to exchange information amongst themselves. This is something that I reference a lot because it was one of the first papers I think I ever read way back in like 2012, maybe, where we were starting to kind of look into all of this understanding of what's happening in the plant world. And this was one of the big topics of conversation, was this discovery that the root apex cells secrete, basically they have this, they're enriched with this auxin, which exchanges information, which basically means it acts like it acts like a neurotransmitter. It is a neurotransmitter. It's just not neuro because it's not brain, but it's the same type of thing. And this is another problem, is that we've named all of these words with the word neuro because we first discovered this. I'm going off another one of my little rants. We first discovered this as human beings around the brain, right? All of our neuromechanism. And so therefore we've given names, and now we're claiming ownership over those names. And it's like, dude, have you ever thought that maybe if you just would have called it an electrical transmitter and not the word neuro that tied it to the brain, maybe then it would be completely okay for us to be thinking about plants and humans and animal and all other kinds of animals, and all in the same way. It's just like our wording traps us so much. Okay. Probably in the coming years, the use of new technology is going to clarify the issue. The above paragraphs have reviewed important discoveries about signaling in plant, but we have not yet mentioned the degree of complexity of their behaviors and capacities. This is the one I like. Interesting. Here we go. Here's an interesting factoid that Michelle gives us. Flight in animals has only evolved 4 times. 4 times. Now you got me curious. Now I'm going to have to go look up which are the 4. See, you gave me a partial answer. Now I'm thinking like, these controversial issues go back to the time of Darwin. In fact, one of the oldest, most surprising debates concerning the root brain hypothesis proposed by Darwin and Charles and Francis Darwin. The Darwins proposed that roots behave as lower animals do, with their apex seated on the anterior pole of the plant body, where it acts as a brain-like organ, basically the root system. In light of recent discoveries about the root apex, right, having these auxins, these neurotransmitters happening, then makes sense. The Darwin's proposal has been reconsidered. It has been proposed that the root apex is a brain-like structure, decentralized, of course, and that the root apex transition zone receives sensory information from the root cap and instructs the motor responses of the cells in the elongation zone. The root brain hypothesis has been supported by testing binary decisions made by maze roots in a Y maze. Also, spatiotemporal dynamics of electrical network activity have been registered in the root apex, and researchers have proposed that its function is to integrate internal and external signaling for development adaptations in response to changes in the environment. So see, all these years after Darwin, we are now starting to get to the science that start to say, maybe some of what Darwin recognized with awareness and truly wanting to see outside of the box, because that's really the true gem, the true kind of nugget of wisdom of Darwin, is the fact that Darwin didn't start with this thought process that says it should be like this and let me see if it is or if it isn't. Darwin really relied so much on observation. I'm not saying Darwin's perfect, man. Darwin was not perfect, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, though, that there is a lot more that we can get by observation and being open to the response. Openness. The experiments have also shown that the electrical activity of the maze root apex is affected by gravity conditions, as happens in animal nervous systems. The capacity of plants to learn is also an intriguing topic that is only really being studied on such small levels, although researchers have found interesting results from studying the leaf folding habituation. Sorry. with all the thing that you're forward proposing, you just talked about learning, and then you called it habituation. Why? Because Galeano was forced to really move towards the word of habituation, which she does, if I remember correctly, she's like, it's not habituation, man. It's not habituation. It's learning. It's learning. So Michelle was telling us about the evolution of flight, birds, insects, mammals, and the dactyls, which are the reptiles, dinosaurs that died off. Did they die off, or are they just hiding from us? Maybe they're just hiding. Maybe they're just hiding. But within birds, insects, mammals, and the dactyls, I wonder if it's always evolved, if it's evolved separately within those chains. Anyways, I'm not going to go off on that time. Michelle, we have another conversation to have at some point because I think it's going to be interesting. Where am I? Okay. Habituation. I got derailed by the stupid word habituation because they're afraid to call it learning. There are discussions about how to interpret the data. See, that's why. That's me. I'm covering my butt again by calling it habituation because there are discussions about the data. Researchers question whether a process of habituation occurs or whether the results can be explained by motor fatigue. Nobody says that. Well, yeah, they do. A lot of people say that, but it's crap. It's not true. You got to read that paper, and we've gone through this. We've gone through this. To resolve this discussion, additional experiments that contrast the viewpoints are needed. Yeah, but you got to want to carry it out. Another intriguing topic is the mechanism parasitic plants use to make decisions. They have the particularity of having to locate a host, and it has been shown that Cuscuta europaea has the ability to choose between hosts depending on host quality. Got to evaluate whether or not, I'm going to get something good out of this. It seems plausible that Cuscuta uses calcium signals to touch its environment, but we still know little about the mechanism to make decisions. Despite ongoing debates, the facts reviewed here show that plants possess a system that uses electrical signals to sense stimuli and generate behavior to fit into the environment, and that this system has an evolutionary history. Thus, the question arises as to whether this system is a nervous system. Yes. Yes, it does. So let's get into the definition of a nervous system, which is, we know, limited. Most dictionaries use phylogenetic definitions to identify nervous systems, such as the following from Collins English Dictionary. Got to get my dictionary voice on. The sensory and control apparatus of all multicellular animals above the level of sponges, the animal, consists of a network of nerve cells. I'm going to read that again because I don't even think I understood it. The sensory and control. So this is what a nervous system is. The sensory and control apparatus of all multicellular animals above the level of sponges, consistent of a network of nerve cells. Well, that's oddly specific. Other dictionaries opt to define a nervous system by directly linking it to the kingdom, Animalia, or to one of its taxonomic ranks. For example, the Cambridge Advanced Learners Dictionary states that an animal's or a person's nervous system, because just so you know, dictionary, persons is very generic, and I think you're trying to say humans, and humans are animals. So if you say animal, you include humans. An animal's nervous system consists of its brain, and here's already our problem. So when you call it like that, consists of its brain and all the nerves in its body that together make movement and feeling possible by sending messages around the body. Let's just send. What if they send it in a bottle? Can you send a message in a bottle and it counts as a nervous system based on this? If it has a brain and it has nerves, but then the messages just get sent around in a bottle, does that count? Sorry. Okay. And Merriam-Webster states that it is the bodily system that in space vertebrates is made up of the brain and spinal cord, nerves, ganglia, and parts of the receptor organs, and that receives and interprets stimuli and transmits impulses to the effector organs. The American Heritage Science Dictionary states that a nervous system is the system of neurons and tissues that regulate the actions and responses of vertebrates and many invertebrates. So one includes invertebrates and vertebrates. One only includes, or several only includes vertebrates. Well, anything above sponges, so that might be invertebrates too. Neuroscience and biology textbooks are more subtle. They define the nervous system as the biological system whose basic cells are neurons. Well, isn't that self-referential? However, this definition too is phylogenetic since it rests on the premise that only animals have neurons and hence only animals have nervous systems. You see the circular problem here? Also, it is problematic because the literature states two reasons that make it difficult to define neurons by themselves. One, outside vertebrates and arthropods, there exists no concept of a neuron based on a specific feature that could define it. E.g., action potentials and specialized synapses are not prerequisites for neurons. So there's no concept of what exactly a neuron is other than I know it when I see it. And genetic analysis have shown that no specific neuronal or synaptic genes exist that are the same in all the metazoans. Again, I'll know it when I see it, but it might not look the same. But as long as it's within something that I want to recognize, I'll recognize it. But if it's not within something I want to recognize, I won't recognize it because we should only recognize it if what we're recognizing is referential to what we want to recognize, not necessarily what is possible to recognize. Did you get that? Did you get all that? Because that was an important one to get. The nerve-like cellular makeup of plants mentioned in the previous section does not reach the same degree of complexity on animal nerves. Although this paper is starting to get, no, that's not true. Actually, I like this paper. Other papers have gotten on my nerves. This one's not getting on my nerves. But research findings have led some scientists to propose that plants have simple, I hate the word simple, have nervous systems. Let's just leave it there. And that plant neurobiology exists. Yes. However, these proposals have been openly rejected by some in the scientific community, mainly human-focused. If you're human-focused, you know like. If you are a little broader, you might like, who argue that the concepts of neuroscience cannot be applied to plants because certain definitions cannot be fulfilled. It is like, sorry, I can't resist this because it just came up and I have to say it. It is. It's like porn. I'll know it when I see it. I don't necessarily want to see it, but I need to see it in order to know it. So therefore, that gives me a reason to see it, but I'm going to continue to tell you that I don't recognize it. That's what this paper is all about. I love it. I love it. As previously mentioned, the controversy could be considered an ontological debate. Yes, it can. But we claim that this assessment is erroneous because phylogeny-based definitions of nervous systems impact the field of evolutionary biology. Defining a biological system using a phylogenetic definition determines a set of interrelated elements that carries out a function. And that set is conserved in the species of a specific branch or subtree of the phylogenetic tree. Did you get all that? Did you get all that? We'll break it down. Trust me, we're getting into it. Basically, defining a biological system using a phylogenetic definition determines, right? This is really about how do we define this? Because if you do and you use this type of definition that basically refers to something else in order to define it, then it's conserved only in the species of that specific thing that exists because you've named that thing to name the other thing. Okay, we'll get more. Under a phylogenetic definition, a biological system denotes a phylogenetic tree, and the biological system does not exist outside of those species. If we accept the phylogenetic definition, which we don't, we are denied de facto the possibility that the system exists outside the phylogenetic tree stipulated by the definition, and that process of convergence evolution exists. Thus, the phylogenetic definition of a nervous system has shaped the current evolutionary viewpoint to be one in which the nervous system has emerged and evolved only in the animal kingdom. I'm going to read that again. Thus, The phylogenetic definition of a nervous system, which is what many scientists use, has shaped the current evolutionary viewpoint to be one in which nervous systems has emerged and evolved only in the animal kingdom. The very definition in and of itself constrains this action to happen. However, when discussing the evolution of living beings, considering process of convergence is necessary. In fact, it is possible that process of convergence between plants and animals in the signaling system exists, and it should be at least discussed. Just at least let's discuss it, at least. An alternative to phylogenetic definitions for biological systems is functions definitions. Several biological systems are defined using physiological criteria. For example, the digestive system, transport, respiratory, reproductive systems. They're only using biological ones. Why is the nervous system different? When considering the evolution of the respiratory system in living organisms, we can use physiological criteria to compare its evolution in insects, mammals, and fish, because they all have respiratory things. Even plants have respiratory systems. But why do we call them respiratory systems? They all act in different ways, and yet they carry out similar functions. Let's see, where am I? We all can also compare the respiratory systems of plants and animals, but assuming a phylogenetic definition automatically affects evolutionary biology because it excludes comparing the evolutionary paths of nervous systems in plants and animals. This difference is how we discuss the nervous system and other biological systems, shows how limiting a phylogenetic definition is. It's also relevant to discuss the phylogenetic definition of a biological system in the framework that systems theory proposes. One of the hallmarks of systems theory framework is that a system is characterized by mathematical functions. Can everything be reduced to mathematical functions? I agree, Michelle. Do they not see the flaw in their logic? Nothing exists in a vacuum, and plants evolved first, so we would have copied off of them. I don't understand how they don't see this piece. If plants came before humans, then therefore, aren't we defining things kind of backwards because we copied them and we're actually an evolution from them? This is a really good question, Michelle. It's a very good question. It's a very good question. On the basis of that fact, this is back to the mathematical functions. If a system is characterized by the function f and another is characterized by the function g, they are determined to be the same for each state, x. The system satisfy f of x and g of x. Oh, how I have to admit, I kind of miss calculus. I did very well in mathematics in my younger years. I loved math and went very, very far in math, even though I never ended up studying. No, that's not true. What am I saying? I have an engineering degree. Hello. After my engineering degree, I never continued to study on with math in those ways. But I did have an amazing love of calculus at a very early age. Very early age. Fell heavily in love with states and integrals. That's what I wanted to say. Integrals, and I love it. So what they're saying here is that we're talking about the states of these systems. Also, the functional viewpoint of systems theory implies that the physical nature of the elements that constitute the system is not important in determining the kind of system it is. It's applied to biological systems. We can address the existence of the same biological system in different species only on the basis of the function it performs. So f of x could be animals and the way our nervous system is connected to a brain, and g of x could be plants with a root-based decentralized nervous system, and X is the factive nervous system. And see how it all works? It all works. It all works. For example, the biological systems that carry out respiratory functions are considered respiratory systems, even though they differ regarding the elements and organs they possess, because a phylogenetic definition precludes considering the existence of the same biological system in different species without an ancestor-descendant relationship. It clashes with systems theory and the physiological point of view. At this point, someone could counter-argue that using a physiological definition to identify a nervous system might not be necessary because there are no nervous systems in other kingdoms or phyla to compare and discuss. However, investigations in plants have found long-distance electrical signaling that control and activate different functions, a fact which, from a physiological viewpoint, must be associated with a biological system. The existence of features or elements in the electrical signaling systems of plants and animals about which evolutionary biology must answer about each one, whether it is a homologous or an analogous feature or element, would imply the necessity of a broader definition of a nervous system to elaborate an answer. Following this premise, we have identified 3 specific physiological issues that imply the necessity of a broader definition. 1, electrical signals and their mechanisms. 2, cell-to-cell mechanisms to propagate electrical signals. And 3, parallelism between the animal automatic nervous system and plant nervous systems. Next, we discuss each issue. So let's get into 1. Electrical signals and their mechanisms. Electrical signals have been observed in animals and plants. The most striking case of having similar electrical signals is the action potential, also called a spike, which is characterized by giving a maximum response or none at all. In animals, there are 2 kinds of action potentials, sodium-dependent and calcium-dependent. Both types are generated by voltagated ionic channels that regulate ion flow across the membrane in response to the membrane potential. Sodium-dependent action potentials are produced by the currents of sodium and potassium, and calcium-dependent action potentials are produced by the currents of calcium and potassium. The calcium-dependent action potentials were first discovered in mammals in Purkinje cell dendrites, and currently we know they are in pyramidal. This is one of those places where multiple languages kind of screws you because I'm like, how do we pronounce it in English? Pyramidal, I don't know, one of the 2. Pyramidal neurons in layer 5 and play an important role in behavior and cognitive function. Calcium and sodium action potentials are generated through voltage-gated ion channels, but whereas there is only 1 kind of sodium action potential, there are 2 kinds of calcium-dependent action potentials, low threshold and high threshold. High threshold calcium action potentials are initiated by high threshold calcium channels, and low threshold calcium action potentials, you guessed it, by low threshold calcium channels. Specifically, dendritic calcium spikes in Purkinje cells are dependent on P-type calcium channel. Although the action potential recorded in Purkinje cell dendrites and the low threshold calcium spike observed I'm not going to read all through this. It's very interesting. If you want, I'm giving you the link of the paper so you can read it. So, because this is really just talking about the mechanism and we get the point of the mechanism. In addition to having short-lasting depolarization of the action potential, animals and plants both have signals based on prolonged depolarization. So here we're going to go into another form of signaling that again shows similarities between animals and plants. Now we're getting into long signal defenses. So again, all of this is all about talking about, hold on. Let me just see where we start with actual kind of like discussion on this. Different studies have shown that plants have mechanisms to generate, transmit, and process electrical signals, and their electrical activity contains information about the environmental stimuli, and that action potentials transmit information. Okay, here we're all similar. In the animal nervous system, 2 kinds of process. By the way, the music of the plants uses action potentials, which tells you how freaking long science has known that plants generate action potentials. Just so you know. Because we started experimenting with this in the late 1970s and the early 1980s. The music of the plants, action potentials. I started reading about action potentials at the beginning of the last decade, okay? In the animal nervous system, two kinds of processes have emerged to send long-distance signals. This is all going into it. Another option is that plants perform cell-to-cell communication, which is another big element, because first they said, no, it can't be a nervous system because there's no cell-to-cell communication. Ha ha, you were wrong. One hypothesis is that electrical coupling communication could happen through plasmodesmata. We all know this stuff, blah, blah, blah. Hold on. Okay. Electronic coupling was thought to be only a minor feature of the nervous system of less evolved animals until it was also discovered in mammals. Oh, this is just simpleton world. And then they discovered in mammals and they have to eat their, yeah. And we now know that there is an important mechanism in different central nervous system structures, such as the inferior olive. The first direct proof of electrical coupling in plants was found in the Elodia canadensis. And electrical coupling between root cells is involved in how plants can extract water from dry soil against a gradient in water potential. Evidence of electrical coupling in electrical circuits has also been found in Biden spilosa, Venus flytrap, and aloe vera. Investigations of electrical networks in Dionaea, which is a plant that I normally call Dionaea, which is the Venus flytrap, which just laughs that I can't say it today, and Aldrovanda trap lobes have revealed a high, rich, synchronous coupling activity. Action potential spread rapidly enough to adjacent cells in the trap lobes to allow the plant to catch prey. Indirect evidence shows that the cells may be coupled bidirectionality, making them fire synchronously. We're going almost an hour and a half, so I get tired, in aquatic carnivorous plants. Given this evidence, the evolutionary history of animals and plants cannot be described without discussing whether a process of evolutionary convergence has generated the same mechanism to propagate electrical signals in multicellular organisms. That's really where we were trying to get to. Okay, we were trying to get to that. It's just the automatic nervous system. In the peripheral nervous system of animals, we find automatic nervous system, formerly named vegetative nervous system, which doesn't make sense anymore as a name because you're just admitting that plants have nervous systems, which controls smooth muscle and glands and thus guides the function of internal organs. The automatic nervous system monitors arterial blood pressure and concentration level of different, okay, again, just like before, I'm not going to read exactly what everything does because that's not the point of our conversation. Similar functions are regulated by automatic nervous system in animals and by electrical signals in plants. It is necessary to discuss whether there is a process of evolutionary convergence between both biological systems. You think? At this point, we consider it relevant to review the work of Darwin, the father of the theory of evolution. In his work, we find arguments against phylogenetic definitions of the nervous system, which is what we were saying an entire page and a half back. Darwin wrote 3 books about plant life, which is not a coincidence. He was trying to change our view on plants. He wrote, "It is truly a wonderful fact, the wonder of which we are apt to overlook from familiarity, that all animals and all plants throughout all time and space should be related to each other in group subordinate to group." Darwin understood that evolution involves a global view about all living beings that requires a framework in which all evolutionary pressures, directions, and paths can be formulated and compared. He was able to see that plants should not be isolated from animals, nor should any of the other kingdom, because, fungi are right there after you, in the study of evolutionary processes. Also, he wrote the following: "I am inclined to believe that in nearly the same way as 2 men have sometimes independently hit on the very same invention, so natural selection, working for good of each being and taking advantage of analogous variations, has sometimes modified in very nearly the same matter 2 parts in 2 organic beings, which owe but little of their structure in common to inheritance from the same ancestor." Clearly, Darwin's work shows he rejected the phylogenetic definition of a biological system because he was aware of the existence of convergence processes. We also consider it relevant to review the work of Ramon y Cajal, the father of modern neuroscience, in regard to a phylogenetic definition of the nervous system. Although we are not aware Ramon y Cajal had any interest in studying plants, he considered that each nervous system must be understood in the context of the evolutionary and ethological niche in which it has developed and survived. Therefore, it can be claimed that the emergence of a nervous system in plants agrees with Ramon y Cajal's view, since plant nervous systems must be understood in their corresponding context, and the plant's evolutionary and ethological niches differ from the animals. Once again, one could claim that neurons and synapses do not exist in plants, and certainly Ramon y Cajal's work is deeply linked with the concept of synapses. But we have two objections to that claim. First, although the plant cells that transmit electrical signals do not have what we currently define as, that's my addition, synapses, but we have, do not have synapses. Using the existence of synapses to define a neuron is not currently a requirement in the field of neuroscience. And from the evolutionary viewpoint, neither action potentials nor specialized synapses are absolute prerequisites of neurons. Some neurons have graded potentials instead of action potentials to transmit information. In animals, neurons exist with different kinds of chemical synapses, and another kind of intracellular transmission from different from wired transmissions has even been found, called volume transmission. Second, Ramon y Cajal's neuron doctrine, which he based on much of his careful research, asserts that the nervous system, in keeping with Schleiden-Schwann's broader cell theory, is composed of discrete and specialized cells in sending signals. Listen to that definition. In his view, the special features of nerve cells, e.g. axons and synapses, remember we talked a little bit about axons when we were talking about root tips, corresponds to evolutionary adaptations associated with niche specializations, such as animals. According to Ramon y Cajal, being composed of specialized cells is the fundamental criteria for defining a nervous system. And how? So being composed of specialized cells, not specific specialized cells, of specialized cells that are for signaling, is the fundamental definition for defining a nervous system. And how the cell is specialized, axons versus synapses, corresponds to the evolutionary process and ecological niche. You get what we're saying here? We're taking a step back and we're saying the nervous system is not defined by these pieces. It's defined by the fact that there are specialized cells that work to create signaling, much like a respiratory system is made up of specialized parts for the transpiration. Don't even get me started with these freaking human neurobiologists nowadays. Although an anatomical feature is sufficient for being a specialized cell, there is no specific feature necessary to specialize in transmitting, processing, or generating signals. Therefore, the key issue in the definition of a nervous system from Ramon y Cajal's neuron doctrine, this is Ramon y Cajal, I mean, seriously, is that the nervous system is made up of specialized cells, and it does not support a phylogenetic definition of the nervous system. Evolutionary arguments at the molecular level also support adopting a physiological definition to identify nervous systems. Electrical signaling is based on the molecular mechanisms of the ion channels and pumps in both plants and animals, a fact that did not occur by chance. Genetic research has shown that there are no de novo structures in living beings, but only those that have evolved from pre-existing structures. We also know, and who were the structures that were there first? Because I don't think humans were there way back 470 million years ago when the plants were there. Mm, mhm, mhm. Riddle me that, Batman. We also know that a basis for ion channels already existed in prokaryotes. Karyotes. I hate that word because I still always say it like I never feel confident. I've yet to feel confident saying it. One day I will. And some researchers have focused on the relationships between signaling and the evolution of ion channels in plants and animals. Those studies shows that issues about the evolutionary path of the molecular signaling mechanism are often studied and discussed from an evolutionary viewpoint. Additionally, ligand-gated ion channels are ancient, and the emergence of GABA and glutamate mechanisms. Remember, we talked about GABA and glutamate, which are very well understood from a human perspective, but we have now learned a few years ago that are also present in plants, is an ongoing research topic. And analysis indicate that the glutamate binding mechanisms of plants and animals have an ancestral glutamate binding mechanism as a common origin. Woo! So we're starting to discover all these new common pieces. Hmm. 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 And they have been diverging. In animals, glutamate receptors with a high ligand specifically had been selected, whereas the plant glutamate receptors have evolved to be non-specific amino acid sensors. Again, I'm going to skip through a little bit of the deep science. Regarding these evolutionaries, because it's basically saying it's a convergent process in both animals and plants, which is great. I mean, I'm so glad that he's pulling all of this stuff out here, that they are, because there's two of them. Regarding these evolutionary analysis, if one can discuss the evolution of molecular signaling mechanisms, it is illogical that one is unable to discuss the evolution of the biological systems that contain those molecular mechanisms. Although at the biological system level, they do not share a phylogenetic tree, they do share one at the molecular mechanism level, thus removing the contradiction in another reason to adopt a new definition to identify nervous systems. We will now present our stance. We will now present our stance. Firstly, Bow's initial claim stating that the physiological mechanism of the plant is identical with that of the animal is wrong because the research clearly shows that the mechanisms are different. On the other hand, Bishop explained, as did Ramon y Cajal, that a variety of nervous systems exist rather than one kind, and that each one uses different properties. This is still the current view today. Thus, although the mechanisms that generate, transmit, and process signals in plants are different from animal nervous systems, there is no a priori reason to deny that they constitute nervous systems that are within the variety of nervous systems that exist in nature. We position ourselves with those who claim, I position myself too, and I don't count for anything in this, but I position myself too with those who claim that speaking about plant neurobiology, oh, wait, I don't know what he's going to say. Hold on. Oh, is reasonable. We do not claim, however, that the terminology for plant neurobiology must be equal to or based on the terminology that already exists for animal neurobiology. I'm agreeing with you too. We're okay with this. I do not like, though, that the current terminology that keeps getting proposed dumbs down the perspective of plants, kind of like simple. I think we need to come up with terminology that is equal, and based on whatever that particular, what that particular kingdom needs. Given these clarifications, what options are available to address that dispute? One attempt to resolve the dispute was made by Peter W. Barlow. He proposed using the living systems theory to reinterpret animal and plant neurobiology mechanisms, but his proposal did not change either side of the argument. We think that the proposal fails to resolve the dispute for three reasons. It does not identify a specific problem in any dispute positions. It does not propose a solution for any problems in any of the dispute positions, and it does not show advantages against the previous position, which would be the force of change of mind. Well, then what's the point of his proposal if it doesn't do any of those? Considering these points mentioned here, we have identified problems on each side. On the plant neurobiology side, we consider it impossible to defend or show that plants have a nervous system like that of animals. To be very clear with his wording, because he's being very clear with his wording, and I appreciate this very much. Because although plants clearly have an electrical signal system to control and generate their behavior, important differences exist between these systems in plants and animals. On the animal phylogenetic side, we find that the phylogenetic definition of a nervous system, which directly excludes the existence of a nervous system in plants, creates a problem in studying the evolutionary history of animals and plants. This happens because the definition does not allow for addressing whether there have been convergence processes, even though research shows that plants have developed mechanisms to react immediately to exogenous and endogenous states. Although we find an incompatibility between the phylogenetic definition and the general system theory. Since discussing convergent evolution processes of a system or an organ in a species that are phylogenetically far removed requires identifying the system or organ that carries out a specific function in those organisms, our proposed solution is to broaden the definition of a nervous system by adopting a physiological definition. We propose this solution because I'm included in that because I'm reading it, okay? We propose this solution because a physiological criterion characterizes a system by its functions and is therefore also compatible with systems theory and the variety of electrical signals and molecular mechanisms that generate them in animals leads us to understand that the definition of a nervous system cannot be formed by identifying a specific mechanism. In the following section, we develop our proposal to broaden the definition of a nervous system and show that this solution provides a framework to generate hypotheses about the evolutionary history of animals and plants that cannot be formulated using the phylogenetic definition of a nervous system. So far, so good. I'm really liking this. I'm really liking his thought out approach. I like that he doesn't slam or negate anybody in his talking, but I think he's just showing possibilities of expansion. And I really do enjoy that and appreciate it. I like that Michelle's like, may I say that I got it several pages ago? Yes, yes, yes. We got this. We got his message very clearly. Number 4, 2 proposals for broadening the definition of a nervous system. In the previous section, we proposed to broaden the definition of a nervous system by using a physiological criterion to resolve the debate about the existence of a nervous system in plants. But how can we do this? The definition has already been broadened by modifying the neuron doctrine by explicitly adding features to the definition of a neuron. However, that broadening has led to the Eumetozoa's nervous system cells remaining under the phylogenetic definition after the unexpected discovery made in the 20th century. Example, gap junctions, neuromodularity, substance, things I don't understand because I'm not a neurobiologist, although I'm starting to feel like I should go to school again. Being against using phylogenetic definitions, we defend that the fulfillment of the definition of a biological system cannot be contingent upon belonging to a kingdom or a phylum. Agreed. One should not reject that a biological system belongs to a class of biological systems based on the mere fact of it not belonging to a kingdom or a phylum, and without studying the system's function. Regarding this position, we suggest 2 options for broadening the definition of a nervous system. The first option applies to the domain of multicellular organisms. The second one applies to systems so that it is more general than the first and can be applied to unicellular organisms. Oh, I love that he's thinking really beyond. He's like, forget it. If I'm going to go in, I'm going to go all in, and I'm going to look at all of the kingdoms and everything we know so far, and I'm going to try to make it as inclusive as possible. I like his inclusivity. I really do. I like their inclusivity very, very much. We developed these 2 options below. All right, 4.1. Broadening the definition for multicellular organisms. Because using specific anatomical features to define a neuron has been shown to be a complex issue in evolutionary biology, we propose avoiding any phylogenetic or anatomical references and considering mainly physiological criteria to formulate the definition. The basic function unit, all known living systems, is the cell. And Theodore Schwann proposed that tissues are groups of cells that can work together to carry out a specific function. Ramon y Cajal found that nervous tissue, the main tissue of the nervous system, is made up of cells. You see where they're going with this? See where they're going with this. Our modern view on the nervous system functions is that it transmits, generates, and processes information to increase the possibility of future beneficial situations, including avoiding damage for the organism. Combining all these points, we propose a nervous system that can be defined as the following. Hold on, let me get my dictionary voice. A nervous system is the system of a multicellular organism that, 1, contains a group or groups of cells that are specialized in transmitting, generating, or processing information. 2, sends signals to other systems, allowing the organism to react to or act upon exogenous and endogenous states by controlling those systems' activities. And 3, generates and sends signals to other systems as a result of communications among multiple specialized cells of the system. This definition is likely to raise many questions for the reader, and we address some of these potential questions below. The use of communication and information in the formulated definition are not fuzzy concepts that allow subjectivity, contrary to what many think. We'll find out. We use them in reference to the definitions provided by information theory. That is, communication requires that a communication channel exists between one cell and another, and the signal's value transmit information from the emitter to the receiver cell because it is unknown what the signal's value will be. We consider that a channel of communication exists only when the transferred element is not an element involved directly in the chemical reactions of the metabolic routes of the receiver cell intended for nutrition. For example, red blood cells that release oxygen do not transmit information because the oxygen is employed directly to create ATP in the receiver cell. The glucose molecules transferred from the astrocytes to neurons also do not transmit information because they are employed directly to create ATP. However, the neurotransmitters released by neurons in the synapses are not nutrients, and they transport information because it is unknown when the neurotransmitter will be received. See the difference there? I actually understand that one. Our definition differentiates between nutrients and chemical messengers, which is fair. I think that that's a fair thing. I think we are going to hit somebody eventually who does both, but at least it has a chemical messenger. Conditions 2 and 3 are important because in multicellular organisms, other systems exist that contain cells specialized in transmitting, generating, or processing information. But these systems must be excluded from the definition because they do not belong to the class of nervous systems. Condition 2, which determines that a nervous system sends signals only to other systems, excludes systems that have the function that directly affects exogenous or endogenous states, even though these systems have cells that are specialized in transmitting, generating, or processing information to carry out that function. The reason is that's the part I need to know. The reason is that if a system has a function and it evolves by increasing the number of computations to give a better response, such a system is not a servant nervous system. Oh, that makes sense. Okay, I get it now. Also, if a system that transmits, generates, and processes information evolves to give a specific response to exogenous or endogenous states by itself, kind of like a feedback mechanism, such a system would no longer be a nervous system because the function would perform would have changed. This is the whole point that he says that what is being transmitted needs to be kind of almost like you don't know what's being transmitted. It's not so much about I always send a signal that says yes, or that says blue, or that says run, because then at that point, that's not a nervous system. A nervous system means I don't know what's encoded in that system, in that message, until the message is received and can be decoded. I get that. One example of a system that transmits, generates, or processes information but does not carry out a specific response is the immune system. The animal immune system is also excluded from phylogenetic definition of a nervous system. Regarding condition 3, we consider it necessary because it establishes a boundary that separates systems that, despite having specialized cells in transmitting, generating, and processing information, use approaches that are completely different regarding the signal generation a nervous system carries out. Thus, this condition makes the definition consistent with the computational models of a neural network, and it excludes those systems whose cells carry out their functions independently of any other cells of the system, even though they generate, transmit, or process information. This does not mean, however, that the computational model of a nervous system can only be the neural network model, because the neural network model determines a specific way of communicating among the cells. Let us look at specific examples. The first is of the animal endocrine system. Its cells carry out processes of generating, transmitting, and processing information because cells in glands release hormones to send signals to the organism cell that have receptors for them. However, cells in glands do not communicate with each other to determine which signal is sent. They respond by themselves. The animal endocrine system is also excluded from the phylogenetic definition of a nervous system. This condition is important because the reader could consider us to have underestimated the processes that plants perform to generate their behavior, but that is not the case. We are aware that plants carry out multiple behaviors to survive, such as managing food reserves, perceiving the force of gravity. This is where Yoda learned how to manage the force from plants. Of course. How did I not think about that? Can we learn how to control the force from plants? Okay, we're going to go on, but I'm going to keep thinking about this. Sorry. But perceiving the force of gravity to determine growth direction or to hold objects up, and competing successfully for resources, among other behaviors. However, the mechanisms that they use to generate those behaviors are excluded from the definition of a nervous system that we propose, because those behaviors are the result of the sum of behaviors that each cell generates by local computations. Thus, we consider those behaviors either not to belong to a nervous system or to be ascribed to hormonal regulatory systems in plants, or to be generated by an interplay of different systems, as occurs in animals in the neuroendocrine systems, a combination of the nervous and hormonal systems. The definition of a nervous system implies the existence of a supercategory that contains the category of a nervous system. We call this supercategory common control system. Alert, alert! We are in the common control system. It contains, there we go. Michelle's got it perfectly. Control the force from plants. We could learn. Thank you. Thank you, young Padawan. It contains other categories that would cover the systems that generate, transmit, process information, but are not nervous systems, such as hormonal systems. However, a discussion of the command control system category and other categories it contains is beyond the scope of this paper, thankfully. It is key to note that organisms must provide a response to exogenous and endogenous states within a critical time to avoid damage. And this is important because of the damage it affects the organism's number of offsprings, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to read all through this because we do think it's important. And so, but it's not an important part for where we are on this. Also, we need to kind of wrap things up for a little bit for him. Okay, so 4.2. 4.2. Wow. Okay. And then 5, hold on. I just want to see how far this goes. Then he goes through all the classes. Wow. This is a lot longer than I expected it to be. Okay. Conclusion is there. We have this. We have a diagram in this page. We're not going to get into all the little nitty gritty details. We'd already talked about that before. Okay. No, we're here. Okay, 4.2, broadening the definition. The previous definition broadened the current definition of a nervous system to allow for establishing whether it fulfilled for any system of each multicellular organism. However, one could require an even broader definition. For example, creating artificial systems inspired by animal nervous systems. I don't want to include that one. I'm not ready for that. Could require discussing a nervous system in an artificial system. I don't want to talk about that. Bishop already stated it is not easy to state an intrinsic difference between a nervous system and a computing machine. Yes, yes. How can it be that in one paper you take all this time to give life to plants and stating about how difficult it is to argue with human neurobiologists in order to have this discussion. And then you easily in 10 seconds say, but it's okay if we can do it for artificial systems. I do not understand the human mind. I do not understand. To achieve this level of generality, it is necessary to have a definition that uses the framework of systems theory. Thus, a definition would be the following. I'm going to read it, and then I'm pretty much going to try to just forget it because I'm not ready to include. I'm not ready. I'm not ready. I'm not ready to include artificial systems, but I'll get there. A nervous system is the subsystem of an autonomous nervous. See, I'm really not ready. A nervous system is a substance of an autonomous system that, one, contains a group or group of elements that are specialized in transmitting, generating, and processing information. Two, sends signals to other subsystems, allowing the system to react to and act upon exogenous and endogenous states by controlling those subsystems' activity. And three, generates and sends signal to other subsystems as a result of communications among multiple specialized elements of the subsystem. A definition of nervous system, this is in 4.3 about discussing these differences, allows only for determining whether a system belongs to a category defined. Ordering systems, including classifications, are needed to reduce this chaotic diversity into understandable, manageable arrangements before scientific explanations are possible. If we want to discuss evolutionary convergence and divergence, we need to define subclasses within the class of nervous systems. Michelle is trying to say, because we created the artificial systems, they are a piece of us and we are gods. I kind of like that, but I just think that the gods have lost control. But that's really what happens anyway. If you look at Greek mythology, I mean, the gods lost control of their people a long time ago. So maybe that is what's happening. Maybe we are gods and we've lost control of our little artificial creations. If we want to discuss evolutionary convergence and divergence, we need to define these subclasses. We propose splitting each definition by using a method to create subclasses, and one of the authors of this paper has recently employed. This method uses a hierarchy in which new level breaks class nervous systems into more subclasses. All right, we are not going to get into this today, because this is really kind of getting into the minutia now. We were great up until now. Now we got into the minutia. The minutia is a little bit too much. So he's talking about all the various classes that contain the systems considered to be nervous systems by the definition used by multicellular organisms. So he's giving each one a different level, and he's defining what's inside of each class. Because of course, from his perspective, he needs to, right, from his perspective as a scientist, he needs to give the most robust definition that he can possibly give in order for this to be accepted. This is a paper. For our intents and purposes, we wanted to hear what direction he was going to include. They were going, not he. I keep saying he, and I mean they. Look at that. That's bad. Bad, Tigia, bad, Tigia. So I'm just stating that we're not going to get into this because this is about now, okay, if I want to be truly accepted, then I need to go into all these different levels. And I need to go into all of the minutia, which is important. Don't get me wrong. We're just not going to go into it today. Discussing the directions of nervous system evolution in plants and animals. Okay, this is number 5. We've gotten out of 4. He's defined a lot of stuff. We have claimed that broadening the definition of a nervous system is beneficial to studying and discussing the evolution of generating, transmitting, and processing signals in living beings. Now we would like to provide specific examples of evolutionary issues that emerge when this broadening is assumed. So, the evolution of capacity of computation. No, I don't. I like chaos, but only to a certain extent. Sorry, Michelle's calling me out on the chaos. No, I only like chaos up until a certain point, okay? I need to control certain things. More than anything, my mind can't process, to be really honest, my mind can't process all of this. Like, I got his broad categories and then some of the levels below. It would take me hours to sit there and try to understand, like, transitional generating system in one group and 2 groups. I don't understand any of that enough to be able to get into it and give you any kind of real commentary. So I'm going to get into the pieces that I think are most important for our discussions as naturally conscious beings that we are. One of the most striking differences between the nervous system of plants and animals is the capacity and the kind of computation that each one possesses. I want to see where he's going with this because I'm not sure. At this point, the reader must remember that our definition contemplates only one specific type of system within all the systems that organisms possess to process, generate, and transmit information. The plant nervous system is fundamentally dedicated to transmitting information, and it carries out a low level of information processing even in carnivorous plants. Even in? Why is that an even in? Anyway. This is true even if plants can process information in the root apex transition zone. Unlike in plants, the animal nervous system carries out mainly information processing. Even reflex arcs are circuits that process information to generate behavior. Therefore, the evolutionary pressures have made plants and animal nervous systems evolve following two divergent paths. This is true. I think we're more stunted. This is my opinion. The animal nervous system has evolved to process information, and the plant's nervous system has evolved to transmit information. Hold on, I'm processing that. I think I'm more processing that. I mean, I think that they're trying to say because we have legs and a rapid movement, we tend to think of ourselves more as reacting to things, where plants, oh, that blows your control thing out of the water, Michelle. I don't know about that. It's interesting to think of it that way. According to free-moving hypothesis, animals need to move constantly to acquire nutrients because the nutrients available at each point in the environment are limited. Moving requires decision-making about which directions are best to pursue because a natural environment is a heterogeneous space, whereas the features of one point in space can differ greatly from another. The choice of direction could lead to very different consequences for the organism. Therefore, animals face a selective pressure to be motile to acquire resources, and the requirement generates a selective pressure to carry out real-time information processing to find nutrients and avoid danger. In contrast, most plants are sessile organisms that convert inorganic matter into chemical energy using photosynthesis. Because environments are common in which sunlight is available throughout the entire day, plants do not face the same selective pressure that animals do to move to acquire nutrients. That is true, but they have to do it for danger. I would just think yes, if you're looking at it that way, but is that apples to apples? The pressure placed on plants has occurred in response to abiotic and biotic stressors in their locations. Fair, okay. Considering this fact, plants mainly need a nervous system to detect stressors and transmit signals to cells that they generate a response within. I don't know if that's actually true because, I mean, I get what they're saying because it is true that sunlight is abundant, but plants also need, nitrogen and other kinds of elements that some of which can be found readily, but some aren't. And so therefore they have to be mobile to a certain extent in order to reach that. Okay, so this talks about like the mechanism used for all of this, which we're not going to get into. So this is why axons emerge and all these different parts. Thus, our hypothesis is that the axon was selected in animals because it achieves the speed required to adapt to the environment, and this speed cannot be achieved with the mechanism selected in plants. This limitation is not a problem for plants because the critical period of time that affects the evolution of their signaling mechanism is longer than it is in animals. So the mechanism selected in plants requires only the speed needed to fulfill the critical period of the time of plants. Also, other evolutionary pressures, which differ in animals and plants, would have caused the selection of the system of repetition points without axons and that plants possess. This would explain why axons have been selected in animals, but why dendrites and synapses have been, but not why dendrites and synapses have been selected. Okay, so he's going into the different mechanisms, which again, like I said, we're not going to, about different types of why, but I don't understand why he goes into all of this in this paper. I guess maybe to build up his proposal of the definitions, but it just seems like it's unnecessary to go into all of this. Maybe it is, but I just feel like it's unnecessary to go into all of this. It's almost like he has to fortify his paper to kind of really prove it in order for it to be accepted. Maybe. So let's see where he gets to with plants. A centralized nervous system, decentralized nervous system, and disconnected nervous system. Another issue is centralized, decentralized, and disconnected nervous systems in multicellular organisms. Each option is a different evolutionary path for nervous systems. We can find centralized nervous systems in multicellular organisms that need global coordination and a high computational capacity. If global coordination requires a high capacity for computation, then the pressure exists to evolve towards a centralized nervous system. I don't get why he's going into all these different types of nervous systems, centralized like animals and have versus decentralized like plants have. I mean, I guess I don't understand if it's really necessary for him to prove his points. So let me read the end of this. By combining our analysis of animal and plant nervous systems organizational processes, we can conclude that the requirement for global coordination affects the evolution of a nervous system, causing the selection of centralized nervous systems. If no global coordination at all is required, a system can be organized to have isolated computational systems, and this option is selected because it minimizes the effects of damage to the system with its lowest energetic cost. If no global coordination at all is required, a system can be organized to have isolated computational systems, and this option is selected because it minimizes the effects of. It's the same thing he just said above. I think there was just a copy and paste there. Conclusions. Let's get to the conclusions because then we're going to wrap this up. Several botanists have defended the existence of a nervous system in plants. However, this idea is not well accepted by other scientists. I've got about 60 papers to go through to prove that, like to show you that. However, this idea is not well accepted by other scientists. If the nervous system is defined as the part of an animal's body that coordinates its actions and transmits signals to and from different parts of the bodies, then obviously the discussion about the evolution of the nervous system in plants cannot exist. True. One could consider this debate to be just a terminological dispute. That's what I think. But the definition of a nervous system is not an inconsequential issue about terminology. I still think it's still terminology. In this paper, we have shown that the current definition of a nervous system has a negative consequence in the field of evolutionary biology. Agreed. That preclude discussing and even accepting the process of convergent evolution in multicellular organism and recognizing other beings as what they are. A phylogenetic definition of an organism's biological system prevents us from considering whether that system has emerged in other organisms outside that definition. Determining that one biological system of an organism and another biological system of a different organism do not belong to the same kind because they do not share a phylogenetic tree is an error. Agreed. Because evolution has taught us that a similar evolutionary pressure to fit can cause the emergence of a similar traits in phylogenetically distant organisms. Different evolution of the same thing. Also, it does not seem logical that one can discuss the evolution of a molecular mechanism because we can trace the phylogenetic tree from them, but not discuss the evolution of the biological systems that contain those molecular mechanisms because it's not within that phylogenetic definition. In this article, we have defended the necessity of removing the criterion that circumscribes the definition of a nervous system, yay, to animals because it precludes discussing the historical evolution of plants and animals by not allowing for addressing whether a trait is similar due to homology or homoplasy. The academic conflict between those who defend and those who deny the existence of a nervous system in plants comes from the question of whether it is valid to use the definitions made by human neuroscience through the study of Eumetozoa clad in species in another kingdom. We do not think that discussing whether the Eumetozoa's definition of nervous system can be applied to the kingdom Plantae can solve the dispute. We have proposed here an alternative solution, broadening the definition of a nervous system by using physiological criteria. We can find the use of physiological criteria and definitions for other biological systems, and using this kind of criteria for nervous systems would allow for such interesting conversation and research to happen. But, anyways, discussing evolutionary convergence processes between plants and animals, which is a necessity in the field of evolutionary biology. On the basis of these arguments, we have developed two broader definitions for a nervous system. One focuses on multicellular organisms, and the other on the broader requirement of defining systems only by its functions. Also, we have shown in section 5 that assuming a broader definition allows for a deeper discussion on the evolution of transmitting and processing environmental systems in plants and animals, which we didn't get into, since it opens up the possibility of formulating new evolutionary hypotheses and reasoning about evolutionary scenarios. Plant nervous systems can be a key element of discussing signal transmission in the nervous system. Thus, our proposal not only serves as a possible solution to this dispute, but also creates a framework in which new issues about the evolution of signaling systems in different kingdoms can be raised. I agree with this, and I really do like this. It's a broader response. It gives a lot more space for exploration. I do like that. Research has clearly shown that there are species in the kingdom Plantae with systems that use electrical signals to transmit information from one place to another of the organism. And their electrical activity contain information about the environmental stimuli. Action potentials. From an evolutionary viewpoint, biological systems emerge if they provide an evolutionary advantage that increases the fitness value of species to their niches. The fact that plants locally perceive signal transmissions from distant points within their bodies allows them to respond to future adverse situations in parts of the organism that have not yet suffered damage. Experiments have shown that this ability increases the fitness of plants and have it over those that do not. Therefore, a signal system emerging in plants is consistent with the theory of evolution. And especially since they're older than us. By examining the functional equivalence among niches and plants and animals, we could study and discuss the effect of evolutionary pressure on the appearance of convergence in the evolution of signal transmission and processing. It is important to know the effects of each evolutionary pressure and know they have driven the evolution of the nervous system. After presenting the important arguments within the field of evolutionary biology that support our proposal to broaden the definitions of a nervous system presented, we claim that textbooks' current phylogenetic definitions of a nervous system impede obtaining a complete view of plant and animal evolution. Agreed. Textbooks should use a physiological definition that considers the system's functions. We are aware that modifying the definition is a thorny subject, but we believe our reasoning is sound and the facts sufficient for taking this step. Science must use a framework that does not exclude any empirical evidence in the formulation and verification of hypotheses. Also, this would not be the first time science redefines a concept or even a field. Consider the history of organic chemistry, for example. Rediscovering Dobzhansky's claim, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution, and it includes a nervous system. Therefore, to advance our knowledge of the nervous system, we would adopt a physiological definition. Very, very, very interesting paper. I am so glad that I did not attempt to do this last week and that instead I decided to give it its own stream because it's taken us 2 hours to just go through the paper. Okay, I did a little bit of commentary during it, but seriously, I did go through a lot of the paper and I skipped pieces. This is a very well-written paper, very easy to understand. I like the thinking that this team has put into this because I really enjoy that this team is looking at it from the perspective of how do we move forward? Let's change the paradigm. Let's evolve ourselves in order to be able to better witness, study, and understand evolution. I really, 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 really appreciate what they have done with this. And I am looking for, again, this is a 2021 paper. I have to go, I'm getting close to the part where I have to start to reorganize all of my papers again because I have so many. I could literally come and do a paper for you every single day. There are so many papers that are so fascinating to go into. So I'm going to start looking out for whether or not there are replies to this, because oftentimes when somebody proposes something as controversial as this, there are replies in it. There are replies that get published. It takes a little while for these replies to get published. So we should be starting to see these replies around now, because 2021, maybe we started to see them in 2023. Some might have come faster if they had prepped or if they had given them information beforehand. But either way, there's going to be replies. I just need to keep an eye out for them. So I am very excited. I think this was a great paper, and I'm glad for those of you that, really got to stay here and enjoy it and watch it to the end. So I am looking forward to your thoughts on this. Remember, as always, you are invited to come into the Naturally Conscious community and continue on in these discussions. I will be, of course, publishing this on my website, publishing this on YouTube, but I also publish it in the Naturally Conscious community, where we can really get into a richer discussion, especially on some of these hairier topics, and kind of get into the details that we think are important and step out of the details that we don't think are important. Because I do think for our conversation, I think for science, all of it is important. But I'm just saying for our conversation around plant intelligence and about understanding the plant mind, and more importantly, how does understanding the plant mind really affect us and our own minds and our own expansion as human beings. So that's it for me this week. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm very much looking forward to our next conversation, which will be next week. I already have a few papers queued up for that. But remember, in the meantime, two big things. One, head on over to my website, get on my mailing list. There are some big announcements coming out right now, and you're going to want to go check those out. So just head on over to my website, tigriagardenia.com, join NCC, because then you'll get them there, or at least join my mailing list, because seriously, some very big announcements coming out that you're really going to enjoy. And the second part is, remember, resist the urge to hold back your emerging green brilliance. This is me, Tigria Gardenia. I'm out. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you for being here.